Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Aurelius Foundation seminar and Zoom this afternoon. We're just going to take a minute or two and let people enter the Zoom environment. So we'll just take a few more seconds here. Let's take another 30 seconds and we'll begin. Okay, let's begin. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm joined here by other members of the Aurelius Foundation, and we wanted to orchestrate this particular discussion around the Stoic student. One of the main objectives of the foundation is, and one of the strategic objectives is to work with university level students around how they look at the world, not only academically, but how they look at their broader spectrum of life through the Stoic lens. Obviously, at this time of year, there is a lot of anticipation, excitement, and in some circumstances, anxiety around working through and assessing and planning for next steps based on the outcome of university results and other examination outcomes. So we wanted to have a webinar and discuss that through the Stoic lens based on recent experience that we have within our group. But the fortunate thing, as the founder of the foundation and co-founder with John Sellers, we're lucky to have a very broad spectrum of experience on the foundation's board and advisory group around this particular subject and other opportunities of evaluating setbacks, failures, and hurdles to overcome in life. And this one is very, very important. Sometimes it is over, no one is dismissing the actual results, whether they're good or bad or indifferent, but how we look into these results and how they're resolved and next stage thinking and planning, even if they are anticipated and very good, or if they're not quite up to what people had expected. So the panelists this afternoon, obviously, Dr. John Sellers is joining me. We're delighted to have Professor Christopher Gill from the University of Exeter. Sucras Gill is here, who's a London solicitor. Ross Patton, who is a recent master's graduate, works in counter-terrorism in London as well. And I'm looking forward to bringing some of my business experience into this discussion as well. So without further ado, thanks to everyone for joining this afternoon, and I'm going to hand it over to John Sellers to talk about some of the perspectives initially from the content of Stoic awareness and sensibilities around dealing with adversity. So John, welcome this afternoon, and over to you.
Thank you, Justin. So yes, I mean, what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about Stoic attitudes to adversity, difficulty, setbacks, failures, all the sorts of things that we all encounter from time to time in everyday life. And in particular, I want to focus on some ideas that Seneca writes about in an essay of his called On Providence. And the first thing, I mean, if we're thinking about developing a Stoic attitude and applying that to difficult situations, unpleasant or unwanted situations, the first key Stoic idea, of course, is that our well-being, our sense of our life going well and going smoothly depends only on our character, right? You develop the right character and you will do well no matter what the circumstances, no matter what life throws at you. And Seneca says, well, if you really believe that, then nothing bad can happen to a good person. The only genuinely bad thing that could happen to any of us is something that compromised our character in some way. But external difficulties, events not going the way that we would like them to go, that's not really anything genuinely bad happening to us. It might be something that we would prefer not to happen, but it's not a genuine evil, so long as our character remains intact. So he starts off by saying very bluntly, well, nothing bad can happen to you, no matter what life might throw at you, no matter how things might go against your hopes or expectations. And he goes on to develop a really quite sort of strong line of thought. I mean, it's very rhetorical. He's probably overstating the case for dramatic impact, but it works very well. He says, whenever things go badly for us, whenever events don't turn out the way we would like them to, we ought to treat this as a kind of a training exercise. Life is testing us, and it's going to see how well we respond to these difficulties. Not only is it a test of our character, quite literally, but it's also an opportunity for us to train our character, right? To improve and develop our characters. And given that character is the key to living a good life, so the Stoics say, then any opportunity for us to improve and develop our character is surely going to be a good thing. Now, Seneca wants to stress that when things go well for us, when things turn out as we would like them to do, we just carry on as normal. That's no great test or challenge for us at all. There's a sense in which we don't really learn anything when things go according to plan. But when things don't go according to plan, when we encounter difficulties and setbacks, that's when we're really tested. That's when we really have to train and develop our character. There's a sense in which if we never faced setbacks or difficulties, we'd never be able to develop our characters any further. And Seneca draws some really quite interesting parallels with physical training. And he draws comparisons with wrestlers and boxers and other athletes. But I mean, in general, we might think of it in these terms, right? So if you want to improve physically, if you want to go into physical training to develop as an athlete, for instance, you need to push yourself in order to really benefit. You need to get hot and sweaty, right? It's not just enough to go for a gentle walk around the block. You've got to really stretch yourself if you're going to develop physically. And again, we might think of something similar in mental training. Let's say someone has a certain ability in, say, I don't know, mathematics, and they want to improve and develop further. Well, they're not just going to sit down and work through simple, easy mathematical problems. They're going to have to face really difficult, challenging ones in order to develop and improve their abilities. And the point that Seneca wants to make is exactly the same thing applies if we want to develop our character. We're also going to have to be pushed beyond what's comfortable, which is to say, we're going to have to face failures and setbacks and difficulties if we want to develop our characters in a productive way. So rather than think of difficult situations as something to be avoided, what Seneca wants to do is flip things on their head and say, well, in fact, these situations are the ones that perhaps truly benefit us insofar as they help us to develop the thing that really matters, our character, rather than assuming that these things are straightforwardly bad situations. And even if we might not want to go all the way with Seneca's rhetoric and say these setbacks are actually good for us, we can at least see that he's drawing out the fact that there are positives as well as whatever negatives we might see in the situation. We can at least see that no situation is straightforwardly bad. There are benefits to be pulled out as well. And in fact, the benefits might be more important insofar as they connect to what matters most. So that's part of what Seneca has to say, right? About rethinking the way we think about setbacks, failures, and disappointments. If we go on to the next slide, the other side of his discussion is to challenge our usual ideas about what we think success looks like. So, I mean, I'll just read this passage very briefly that Seneca writes. He says, unimpaired prosperity cannot withstand a single blow. But he who struggled constantly with his ills becomes hardened through suffering, and no misfortune makes him yield. So what Seneca wants to stress is that when life goes well for us and everything goes smoothly and we're successful and it all turns out the way we would like, not only do we not get the opportunity to test and develop our character, but we also run the risk of becoming lazy, weak, complacent, entitled. We don't have any of the opportunities to really appreciate the things that we are benefiting from, and we don't get the ability to improve either. When things go well for us, we learn nothing. When things are difficult and challenging and they test us, then we learn all sorts of things. We learn what really matters to us, what's most important to us, right? If we're disappointed that something doesn't go our way, we at least have learned that that's something that matters to us. We have to think through how we're going to respond to that difficult situation, what new strategies we're going to develop. We do a lot of hard work when things don't go well, but when things are smooth and we think we're successful, in fact, we learn nothing, and maybe we become a bit weaker in the process. So Seneca wants to suggest that what we think of as failures and setbacks in fact benefit us, and what we think of as straightforwardly successful outcomes may actually damage us in some ways. And as I say, we might not want to completely flip things on their heads, but we at least might want to challenge the usual narratives that we tell ourselves about what failure looks like and what success looks like. Perhaps we can see that there are benefits and dangers from both of these things. So that's really what I wanted to say about what Seneca as a Stoic has to tell us about how we might think about setbacks, just to kind of set things up for our conversation. So perhaps at that point, I'll open it up to some of our other panelists and see if anyone would like to add anything more. Perhaps we start with Chris.
Yeah, I'm reminded of another Senecan passage, he wrote a book called On Peace of Mind. And in that he takes a kind of, he makes a comparable point, a similar point in a way, but in a different way. What he's considering there is a kind of dialogue between Seneca and someone else. And what he considers there is the situation, which might actually be the situation of some of the people listening in, and often is the situation of people once they've taken exams and want to get on to the next stage, when they want to get a job, when they want to find a kind of pathway in life. And Seneca is considering that kind of situation. And the question is, what do you do when you've missed what you wanted to do? When you got a 2-1 when you needed a first, or you got a 2-2 when you needed a 2-1, and therefore you're knocked back in terms of what you wanted, of the role you wanted to play, the job you wanted to get, the career you wanted. So what are you going to do? And Seneca considers a range of possible fallback positions, but the one that he explores most is one in which you say, well, okay, I can't have that role, but what I can do is to work out what it was about that role that I thought was really worthwhile. Why did I want to have that role? In fact, his example is getting into politics. And Seneca says, well, okay, think about what it was that you were trying to achieve. What was the good thing that you wanted to bring about, or what qualities, what virtues did you want to express by having that role, by taking that job, by having that position, and think about whether you can express those things in another context, in another job that you can get. And he talks about, in his case, he talks about all the different forms that being political can take. You may not be in active politics, you might be in private life and still have a kind of public persona. But it doesn't matter, the example doesn't matter. It's a matter of thinking about whether those original objectives and intentions and hopes can be realized in another context, and a context that is, within your scope, within the scope of your getting a 2-1 or 2-2 or failing perhaps at the exam level. So I think that's a really interesting case, and it's parallel, of course, to what you've said, because it's looking at things not in terms of their external success, their sort of glamour or superficial status, but what really matters about the role that you're undertaking. Okay, so that's another Senecan insight, I think, for this purpose.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, on the issue of disappointment, I mean, again, we can connect it to the way in which the Stoics think about emotions, because if someone feels extremely disappointed about an outcome, well, on the kind of Stoic account, well, what does that tell us? It tells us they've made a value judgment, that something really bad has happened, that has generated this emotional this emotional feeling, this feeling of disappointment. And so there's a sense in which your emotional reaction to a certain situation tells you something about your value judgments, about what you think is most important and what you think isn't. So it can give you that window into what you think is worth pursuing.
Exactly. I mean, if you are really disappointed, if you're devastated by this, it's because what you wanted wasn't really the role and what it could achieve, but the position, the status, the reputation. And so that's what's attracting your attention and your focus and your desire. And but that's the Stoics will say, well, that's a matter of indifference. What you should be thinking about is what you can really achieve in that role.
Both Chris and John, thank you for the setup and the Stoic understanding there. I think Seneca versus other Stoics, based on his role, what he went through, his exile periods, his return to Rome, his ultimate demise, etc., I think is a very poignant Stoic understanding of this particular subject of continual roller coaster ride through life and dealing in a very stressful situation. So I just want to open up now the conversation. I'm just keeping a sense. We've got about 25 minutes left. So we're fortunate to have both Chris and John here, but Sukraj and Ross have joined us. And I'm going to start with Ross in a moment. But I think some of the telling points there that were pulled, that strike a nerve with me in that overview, looking at some of my own opportunities in life. The funny thing is that as a former athlete or as a businessman, I never really learned anything, generally speaking, from my victories. I always thought the victories I deserved them in some sense in my former years, but it was the failures that really forged that character that I hope that I have, that made me think about things a lot differently. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But before we get going, let's introduce Ross, who's an important advisor and partner to the Aurelius Foundation. He's going to share some of his experiences directly related to exam results and his progression in the early part of his career. So Ross, welcome this afternoon, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Yeah, so my experience in relation to this is that, as you said, I think the challenges we face and the adversity we face can be actually really helpful in the long run in giving us a sense of what really matters and actually building resilience and making us stronger and building our character. Now, in particular, there are a few instances in sort of my early journey in academia. So even with A-levels, for example, I had to resit my A levels. I totally failed my first year, and I really struggled in particular with attention deficit disorder and really concentrating and actually being able to concentrate on my work in class. So I had to resit the year. Even after resitting the year, I still didn't do quite as well as I expected. I had to go through clearing to get into the university that I eventually ended up in. When I got to university, I did quite well, and then therefore had quite a few expectations about my future and sort of what career I would go on to do. But ultimately that didn't materialize. I thought very naively that I could sort of walk off into the sunset post-graduation into this great job and do very well. But the reality was very different. The reality was that I didn't get the job that I thought I would. And I had other things percolating in the background that also sort of dissolved. And so the reality was that I was left going back to my parents' place post-graduation in order to sort of send out CVs in a way that, frankly, I really didn't expect. But that experience of having that struggle and that adversity was really, really valuable because it ultimately made me much more hardworking and improved my character in the long term. And I think it takes sort of an experience of loss to be really grateful, ironically, for the things we have. And so now I don't take anything for granted. I'm much more keenly aware of how I don't really deserve anything. It's all based off of work, really. And now that's improved my character of no end. So I think these experiences, when we talk about Stoicism, and in particular how Epictetus talks about the idea that it's not events that trouble us, but the meaning that we attach to them, I think at the time we can be so ridden with anxiety about the future, but actually if we can see, as John alluded to, that this can be a sort of training ground for our character and resilience in future life, then I think that can be very positive. But I'd like to open it up to the rest of the panel to see what they have to say as well.
There's some really strong points in there, and especially from a young person or younger person's perspective about where you go from a certain position. And some of the points you mentioned there, I think Ross is very, very poignant. It's the ability to reset. I'm going to ask Sukras to share some of her thoughts in a moment, but I can endorse some of your points, Ross. There's a young person in not far from me here who's known to our family who had a recent set of disappointing results. And it was quite difficult for that young person to reset because they had one place they wanted to go to university. It was dependent on those results. Those results didn't come through. And it was very devastating for this young person. So I have been spending quite a bit of time with this young person, just walking through the different things that you referenced there, Ross, about resetting, that life is not over, that you need to think about other options. Was it the right course, as Chris mentioned, talking from Seneca's perspective, reevaluating the original goal? Was that the right goal for many different reasons? And most importantly, what doors will open up now that you will redivert energy into accomplishing and moving forward to different sets of ideas or resetting for that original goal? But when you're in the forest, sometimes, and those results come down, it can be very devastating. It can be. But the Stoic toolkit can be very powerful to reset ideas and expectations, as even you referenced about Epictetus in his most famous theme. Sukras, over to you for your commentary, please.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I think one of the points I really want to reiterate here is how valuable this discussion is for any students who are dialed in. I discovered Stoicism a lot later on in life after university, and I think this would have been incredibly useful, a lot of useful tools, a lot of useful perspectives in tackling some of the challenges that came up in my younger years. And I think one of the key points to make is that setbacks happen and life oscillates. We have successes, and then we have things we perceive to be hurdles or failures or setbacks, and then things start going well again, and then we have other things that go a little pear-shaped. And the only constant amongst all of those things is the mindset we adopt to tackling those setbacks. And I think that my personal story now, in hindsight, looking on my post-university progress and my journey really illustrates that. I came out of university having studied law without a training contract, and at the time it was really necessary to have a training contract plus the legal practice course in the UK in order to qualify. That was the route I wanted to take. I know for many law students now it looks slightly different. The system and the framework has changed somewhat, but at the time I didn't have the training contract. I had a lot of student debt and knew that should I go on to study, I would be taking on more debt for the legal practice course without necessarily having a training contract in hand. And it was tough, right? I mean, it was a lot of hard work. To Ross's point, you really think about how to push yourself, but equally, to John's point, not only do you develop character abilities and shape your mindset in such a way and improve within the fairness of these difficulties, but equally you find new tangible strategies to proceed, to go forward, whether that's thinking more strategically about how you're going to place yourself, working within your career framework, whether it's becoming more resilient, whether it's learning how to work within the career framework you find yourself in, or with the different persons or networks you find yourself within. Crucially, post-university isn't all about doing well on an exam. That, you know, in my view, doing well on an exam isn't necessarily the be all and end all for your career. There are so many other skills that are necessary, and having that difficulty early on, to John's point, did help me develop new strategies. So post-university, I took on risks in studying further, taking on more debt, and then ultimately things started to go well. I got the training contract immediately upon completing postgrad. I was then retained as an associate, got my first offer, and so on and so forth. And I think what we can learn from my story, from Ross's personal story, is that sometimes things are going to go not the way you wanted, and sometimes they will go exactly how you wanted. But certainly from my experience, it's really only when things start going badly, or you have setbacks, or you have hurdles, that you think up new ways. It almost necessitates a new way of thinking in order to tackle these issues that crop up. And the one thing I would say to any student who finds themselves in difficult circumstances is don't let a setback blind you to the opportunities that are still out there, because they very much are. Back to you, Justin.
Very good. John, and Chris, I'll start with John, but being in that academic world and some of the commentary from Ross and Sukras, as you're working with students and previously working with students over the years, putting the Stoic mentorship hat on, what are some of the conversations you've had over the years when results have been, because I think we've talked a little bit, obviously focused this afternoon when things get to be somewhat of a struggle. But I'm also a great believer in the strength of Stoicism when things are going well, because they can keep you balanced. They can keep you centered on a more even keel of maximizing your opportunities. So it's not only just when things are really tough, but when things are going well, and the Stoic framework is a very beneficial approach, that toolkit of stability. But John, anything, and then Chris, anything around working with students over the years as they've gone through both good results and less than expected results from your experience using the Stoic mentorship hat?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few discussions with students about this sort of thing over the years. I suppose one interesting thing to do is to try to analyze these situations and try to work out why things have gone well or gone badly, right? So, I mean, sometimes people don't do as well as they would like to have done, and sometimes there might be a very clear reason why, right? They might suddenly have been struck down by illness, right? Or there might have been a family bereavement that has just taken all of their concentration away from their work. And there's a very obvious reason why the person hasn't had the opportunity to work at the standard that they were hoping. But often you'll get students who are very disappointed with their results, and there isn't any kind of external set of circumstances like that would explain it. It's in fact that simply they're not actually that motivated. They weren't actually that connected to what they were doing. And that, to be honest, their failure is down to them rather than any kind of external adversity. And it's a kind of a wake-up call. And well, if this matters to you as much as you think it matters to you, then why aren't you putting the hours in? If you're not putting the hours in, does it matter to you quite as much as you think it does? Where's the motivation? What's important? And there's the opportunity for that kind of conversation. I mean, picking up on what Chris was saying earlier, kind of sort of values clarification. What matters most here? What's going on? And that can actually be quite a useful conversation to have, because there's a sense in which people don't always stop and reflect to think about what it is that's driving them forwards in the first place.
Very good. Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to mention another Stoic idea, well, one that's very relevant for this. That's an idea we find in Cicero, that in choosing your project in life, it's useful to think of yourself as having 4 kind of roles, and that what you want to do is to try and bring these roles together, because you sometimes have students who are very able and who do and have got good results, and they say, I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. I could do all sorts of things, and then for those students, but this also applies to others, you can say, well, okay, try and bring together these 4 factors. One is what it is to lead a good human life. What is it that makes a good human life worthwhile? Which for the Stoics is expressing the virtues and using them to do good in life. Secondly, the second role is your own specific qualities and inclinations. What you like doing and what you can do well. The third one is your background, your context, because we all begin from somewhere. And the fourth role is then the specific career path that you're going to head to. And I think it's useful. I found it useful to get students to play around with these 4 ideas, these 4 roles, and see whether they can put them together. Because often people say, oh, well, I just want to do what I enjoy, but that could be anything, and it might not be something that's really worthwhile that they can consider worthwhile, or you can consider worthwhile, or it might be something that's completely unrealistic, given where they're coming from, or it might be something that doesn't have a definite career focus. So I think putting together these 4 roles can be a really helpful way of making that choice when you're able to make a choice, and it can also be helpful because it can make you realize that the second and third and fourth choices can also be ones that can fulfill those conditions of leading a really good human life and leading one that may be good for you. So I think that's the 4 roles is another Stoic idea that can be extremely helpful in this context.
Indeed, very, very, very powerful. And a couple of things you touched on there, Chris, but also that's coming out in the theme of the conversation. Over the years, both in the athletic arena early off and also in the business world over the last 30 years, it's been very interesting to me to see careers that develop and become very, very successful. And I would have to say that the majority of some of the most successful people that I've encountered that have worked with me, for me, and around me have been those individuals who had significant failure early in their career. And I mean significant failure. And it either remotivated them, repositioned them, repurposed them because of the failure. In some instances, it was a complete shift in career and academic setup, because of your original point, Chris, that it forced that individual to think about, am I on the path that I thought I should be on? And the second thing was some people double down in a very positive way, to your point, John, that they weren't working hard enough or focused enough or driving and saying what is going to really be required here. But it was very interesting that I look back on this and I look at another founder of our foundation in Pat Cash, his very dramatic failures before he won the 1987 Wimbledon title are quite interesting. I've been out at Wimbledon twice this week and seeing some of the players come through who in the last years have had significant failure, injuries, other problems in their life, overcome because they doubled down on their experiences and their failures. Whereas again, I would reference John's point this afternoon, talking about that expectation, as Seneca mentions, that if you do not have some sort of setback or hurdles to overcome, your character doesn't develop. And if it's a straight line of success all the way through, at a certain point, if you get too long in the journey of life and you haven't encountered that failure, boy, when it appears, it can be more dramatic and more difficult to overcome on that basis because you haven't been steeled on the way through. So I think there's some very powerful points here. The other thing that I would reference is the point that Seneca talks a lot about, and having just recently read about a little bit more detail about his biography and the details of his life, his dramatic exiles from time to time. And he talks a lot about providence and how fickle fortune can be. And I think we tend to forget that sometimes in the way that our Western society is set up today, and the expectations with social media, and every life is great, and the only thing that's high majority of postings on social media is all positive. It's just not reality. And that fortune and providence can be extremely fickle and move in and out of our lives just based on circumstance and happenings around us. On that note, we've got about 5 more minutes, so I'm going to turn back to Ross and Sukraj for any closing comments or anything you'd like to add based on the commentary that we've had thus far. So Ross, starting with you.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. It's interesting to hear John mention sort of circumstances that can affect our journey through life, and particularly at university. One of the things that I noticed quite a lot of was people's social life having a big influence on sort of their academic progress, for example. And I think in first year, obviously you want to socialize, you want to make friends, and that's great, that's part of university. But I think some people as well maybe took that too far, and it got to second and third year and they were still sort of leading the same life of sort of going out and drinking and partying that they were originally leading in first year. And I think John can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think Epictetus has this quote about if you brush up against people who are covered in soot, you're going to get covered in soot yourself. And so that, if we extrapolate that to character, I think often if you sort of if you surround yourself with people who lack character, frankly, then that can have a really negative effect. And that's something that I really saw at university, and was really thankful actually and grateful that I gravitated away from the wrong people when I could have all too easily been one of those people that were in those circles too.
Very good, thank you. Sukraj, closing comments or thoughts from you, please?
Yeah, I think there's just a couple of points I want to touch on. One was from John, in that when some students may have come across their results and they're less than pleased with them, but also then recognizing that perhaps I haven't been as focused on my studies or as focused as I could have been on my goals, and having at that point having to clarify and have clarity on what I want to do and drive forward. I would argue that happens at that point at university or in further study, but also as you go through life. I think as you progress, as you go through different stages of your career, it's worth considering, is the life you're leading one which reflects your values as you move forward. The other point I want to touch on, actually, I think it's a quote from the same essay. It's not what you endure, but how you endure is important. And that perhaps speaks to, Justin, your point about early setbacks or hurdles in your career, and arguably throughout life, in your personal life and in your career as well, in that these things, as I mentioned, oscillate. We have our highs and our lows, but how we manage them is really the crux of the matter. That's what will influence how you react productively, constructively, finding a way forward, and in a manner that is useful and conducive to your own well-being as well. Often when times are difficult, we can find ourselves emotionally exhausted, not from what we're doing for the situation, but simply from how we're reacting to it. So how we endure, I certainly agree with Seneca, is incredibly important.
No, very good. Very good. On that basis then, let's go to some key takeaways for this particular webinar this afternoon. And John, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, I mean, there are a number of kind of general comments we might want to take away. As we said, you know, sometimes things won't go the way that we'd like them to, right? This is just part and parcel of normal human life. Sometimes things work out the way we would like, sometimes they don't. We can sit around and complain when things don't go our way, or we can try and think of those difficult situations as opportunities for training, as opportunities to learn and develop and improve. And that can be a positive way to approach some difficult situations, maybe not all, but certainly some. And when things don't go the way we like them to, it also gives us this opportunity to stop, pause and think, okay, what's going on? Why am I responding in the way that I am to this difficult situation? Why does this matter to me so much? Where am I placing the value here? And why didn't it work out? Was this some external force beyond my control, or am I in some way complicit in the fact that things haven't worked out the way I wanted to? And in the process of that kind of analysis, which, as I was saying earlier, we don't do when things are successful because we don't need to stop and think. But when things go badly, we stop and pause, and we can learn a lot about ourselves, our goals, our values, and what matters most for us. And that's a really useful process to go through. And as I was saying from Seneca's essay, if we can gain all these benefits when things don't go so well, then we also perhaps ought to caution ourselves about the dangers of success. We should remain mindful of the fact that if we are consistently successful, we might start to expect success in the future. And as Ross was saying earlier, we want to really appreciate and enjoy the successes that we have, appreciate them for what they are, really savor our good luck when things go well, rather than just expecting it in a slightly entitled way.
Good, thank you. Chris, any final comments from you, please?
Just, I think a lot of the discussion makes us, what the Stoics want to say in this area partly is, well, what is success and what is failure? Success is living a good human life and expressing virtues. Failure is failing to do so. How far that's going to match with worldly success, with position and status, that's secondary. The really important question is are you displaying these four virtues of wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation, or not? So I think the whole question of what is success and failure is raised very much by this whole debate, really, and these situations.
Very good. There's one question here that has come in, and I'd like to share it with the panel here and probably start with John for a response. It says, how would you approach students who are not invested in their studies but are merely going through the motions due to a family and social expectation, but are anxious about the results? So just repeat that. How would you approach students who are not invested in their studies? They're merely going it through for other reasons, their parents or family expectations, but they are anxious about the results. it's an interesting question, because are they anxious because of the results? Are they anxious for the outcome of their parents? Are they anxious for what they have done with their time? But John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this resonates with some conversations that I've had with students in the past, where they're perhaps not so invested in what they're doing, but they are very, very concerned about letting their parents down. They might be conscious that their parents have given them a lot of support, and that they don't want to appear ungrateful for that. But again, it's a crisis moment, right? It's a crisis moment where someone has to stop and think about what really matters to me, what's most important. And if someone is not doing as well as they feel that they could, perhaps, as was mentioned earlier, that's an indication that they're perhaps going down the wrong path at the moment. And it's time to reflect and reconsider about what the right path for them might be. I mean, I can certainly think about this. We haven't talked about all of my many failures over the years, I've gone down various paths, and at a certain point you realize, well, maybe this isn't the right path for me. I need to stop, and once I find the right path, then I'll be able to flourish. Then I'm going to be able to do really well, because I'm going to be really committed and motivated to work hard, as a number of us have mentioned earlier. But you can't do that going down the wrong path.
I think you raised a very important point there to close out, is the value of time. And I am guilty of being overly determined to achieve certain objectives over the years, not quite realizing that possibly I should have backed away from that objective earlier. Because not only was I not suited to run that particular journey, I also then sacrificed the time that I devoted to it, which I could have been using somewhere else. So I think in closing this particular debate, we've got a couple of administration points we want to share with everyone in a moment. But one of the things that's really important is the utilization of time, and whether the results that students are getting now are setting them on a path that they anticipated, great. Whether those results aren't as good as they anticipated and there's a rethink moment. I think in both circumstances, I think what's coming out this afternoon amongst many points is the opportunity to now reflect. The results were good, the results were not so good, but in either case, am I thinking about a bigger picture for my life, my character, my devotion to activity within the time that I've been allocated? Because as is one thing's for sure, the time that we have ultimately is all finite. So I'd like to thank you, the panelists, for joining me this afternoon. There's a couple of updates we'd like to share with everyone. I'll cover the first two, and then I'll ask Sucros to talk on a couple. One is our big YPO event for the YPO community in Athens in September from the 22nd to the 26th. It looks like it's going to be a very exciting event with over 60 CEOs and family members coming for that event. So we're very excited about, in the heartland of Stoicism, that the Aurelius Foundation and working with Donald Robinson and Plato's Academy is also pulling together. The second thing is, which was a great success, was our recent Stoic survival program that we did in the Scottish Highlands. We were extremely pleased with the execution of that, with John and Laurie from the foundation doing an outstanding job, and we're looking forward to building on that program as we go forward, either later this summer or into next year. It was really refreshing to be out in such an environment and doing Stoic exercises, discussion, and programs with both Laurie and John. Sucros, over to you for our last 2 points.
Thanks, Justin. So the Aurelius Foundation supports Stoic societies at universities. Those of you who have been on our website or follow our social feeds will see that we have a University of Cambridge, a society that often holds in-person events as well. And we just wanted to make sure that if anyone has any questions about setting up a student society, that we do support, and we're very happy and open to having conversations about the Aurelius Foundation societies, any questions you have around setting up societies. And Ross on the webinar today is our university and higher education lead as well. He's very happy to take the time. What I can do is we will paste a link in the chat today. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. And lastly, The Aurelius Foundation blog is available on our website, and if you missed it, our latest workshop with Anya Leonard on the Stoic filter is also available in our seminar library as well. Back to you, Justin.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a great weekend. We really appreciate the discussion and the time that the panelists have put in this afternoon. If there's any questions that come from the audience, and also we'll make sure that this is posted soon. I'm sure it will be picked up by a lot of people within the foundation and wider within the Stoic community. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Okay, bye.